Malik Sterling froze in the darkened, cavernous hallway of his Lake Forest estate. He had returned 4 days early from New York to surprise his aristocratic fiancée, but the 40-room mansion was wrapped in a terrifying, suffocating silence. Beside the heavy oak door of the locked third-floor storage suite, the young maid, Kendra Hayes, stood barefoot and shivering against the polished oak floorboards, tears streaming down her pale face. Before Malik could demand an explanation, a child's choked whimper echoed from behind the deadbolt. Kendra quickly pressed a trembling, calloused finger directly to her lips. "Please, sir, say nothing. If Miss Victoria knows you heard that child, they will make her disappear before dawn, and my brother will never leave that hospital alive." Heavy footsteps clicked from the lower staircase. An expensive French jasmine perfume drifted into the cold corridor. Who was being hidden inside Malik's multi-million-dollar home? What monstrous secret had his elegant future wife brought across his threshold? And why was an exhausted housekeeper risking her life to protect a prisoner in the dark? Before we uncover the truth behind that locked door, tell us what city you are listening from and what time it is where you are. Subscribe and stay with us for this unforgettable journey of courage, betrayal, and redemption. 4 days before Malik Sterling stood in that paralyzed hallway, he was seated 700 miles away in an executive penthouse overlooking the gray morning skyline of Manhattan. A leather-bound portfolio filled with multi-million-dollar maritime logistics contracts lay open on the glass desk before him, but his dark eyes were fixed entirely upon a single photograph on his smartphone. In the frame, Victoria Vance stood beneath the weeping willow trees in the private botanical gardens of his Lake Forest estate. She wore a tailored ivory linen dress and smiled with the effortless grace of old American money, one slender hand shielding her eyes from the summer glare. In exactly 12 weeks, beneath the vaulted arches of Fourth Presbyterian Church in downtown Chicago, she was scheduled to become his wife. Malik had spent 22 ruthless, exhausting years building Sterling Meridian Logistics, transforming 2 rusted flatbed trucks on the south side of Chicago into a $4 billion freight empire spanning 48 states. Massive wealth had brought him private hangars at O'Hare, seats on prestigious philanthropic boards, and deferential smiles from corporate executives who had once crossed the street to avoid his path. It had never brought him a single hour of genuine peace. Victoria seemed to offer that elusive tranquility. She was educated at Northwestern, effortlessly poised and perfectly trained in the subtle social rituals of Chicago's upper crust. She knew how to charm foreign investors over dry martinis and could navigate a high-stakes political fundraiser without confusing a single donor's family lineage. When Malik's mother passed away, Victoria had stood beside him in the rain, offering soft reassurances and wrapping his grief in elegant distraction. He truly believed he had found the anchor his restless soul had sought for decades. That morning in New York, his senior vice president and longtime confidant Marcus Cole entered the suite carrying a tablet. "The final maritime review has been postponed until Friday morning," Marcus noted, adjusting his glasses. "The underwriters want another 48 hours to audit the revised freight liability clauses." Malik closed the leather portfolio with a sharp click. "Then they can audit the clauses without me." Marcus studied his employer's exhausted expression. "Your itinerary has you returning to Illinois on Monday afternoon." "I have been away from home for 19 straight days," Malik replied, a faint, rare smile softening his angular jawline. "Victoria believes I am trapped in board meetings until early next week. I am flying home on the evening shuttle to surprise her." Marcus knew better than to debate the founder once his mind was set. He arranged the private charter flight to Midway and gave strict orders to keep the early return entirely confidential. Back in the leafy, ultra-wealthy enclave of Lake Forest, morning sunlight broke over the high wrought iron gates of the Sterling residence. From the exterior, the property looked like a vision of untouchable American luxury. Manicured boxwood hedges bordered the limestone motor court, private security cameras swept across the perimeter lawns, and 3 private gardeners trimmed the rose gardens in absolute quiet. Inside the cavernous house, Kendra Hayes carried a heavy brass tea service up the grand staircase with both hands. At 28 years old, Kendra had mastered the art of making herself virtually invisible. She walked softly in worn canvas shoes, spoke only when spoken to, and never allowed the bone-deep exhaustion of 70-hour work weeks to show in her posture while Victoria was present. Her pale gray housekeeping uniform had been mended 3 times at the left shoulder, but it remained spotless and pressed with military precision. She paused outside the locked third-floor storage chamber at the end of the east gallery. The door was secured with a heavy deadbolt that had been newly installed 8 days earlier. A tiny, muffled rustling came from within the dark room. "Kendra!" Victoria's voice cracked through the hallway like a bullwhip. Malik's fiancée stood at the entrance of the master suite, draped in an emerald silk morning gown. Her dark hair was perfectly pinned, her features composed, but her sharp hazel eyes instantly locked onto the tea service and the heavy brass deadbolt. "Why are you lingering outside that wing?" Victoria asked, taking 2 slow, calculated steps down the carpeted hall. "I was bringing the fresh towels and mineral water you requested, madam," Kendra answered, keeping her eyes fixed firmly upon the baseboards. "I explicitly told you to leave all supplies on the service console near the west elevator," Victoria said, her tone dipping into icy irritation. "What were you doing near that door?" "I was not listening, madam," Kendra whispered. "Do not insult my intelligence in this house," Victoria snapped, closing the distance between them. Before Kendra could offer another excuse, something soft bumped against the inner panel of the locked room. It was followed by a tiny dry cough and a faint trembling whimper. Neither woman moved. The grandfather clock at the end of the landing ticked 3 loud, hollow beats. Victoria's gaze turned to cold granite. She reached out, took the heavy brass tray from Kendra's hands with sudden force, and set it roughly on a marble side table. "You heard nothing." Kendra's calloused fingers curled tightly into the fabric of her white apron. "Yes, madam. Look at me when I give you an instruction," Victoria commanded. Kendra raised her chin, meeting the cold gaze of a woman whose family had held generational power in Cook County for nearly a century. "You need this employment, do you not?" Victoria asked, her voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper. Kendra did not answer, but the silence spoke for her. Her 19-year-old brother Devon was fighting severe aplastic anemia in the intensive care unit of a Southside medical facility. His daily medications, blood transfusions, and experimental antibody therapies cost $4,217 every 3 weeks, consuming every penny Kendra earned across 2 cleaning jobs. 2 months prior, Malik Sterling had personally approved an emergency $4,000 wage advance after learning of Devon's sudden hospitalization. But Victoria had delivered the check with a very clear warning. The money was a conditional favor, entirely dependent upon absolute compliance. "Your brother's medical care is remarkably expensive," Victoria continued, tapping one manicured nail against Kendra's collarbone. "Stay in your lane, finish your cleaning on the lower levels, and keep your ears closed to matters that do not concern your kind." Victoria extracted a small brass key from her robe pocket, unlocked the storage door, slipped inside, and shut the heavy oak frame before Kendra could catch a single glimpse of the interior. 2 minutes later, Victoria emerged carrying an empty porcelain teacup. The lock clicked shut once more. For the rest of the day, the Sterling mansion functioned with cold, mechanical efficiency. Organic groceries were delivered, private security monitored the electronic perimeter, and wedding planners from Michigan Avenue called every 45 minutes to confirm floral arrangements. Yet beneath the polished marble surfaces, terror had set in. Kendra had first discovered the child 7 nights earlier. While collecting laundry linens at midnight, she had heard a tiny, desperate voice crying for water through the bottom crack of the storage room. When she cautiously asked Victoria about it the following morning, she was told that a distant relative's orphaned child was staying temporarily before being placed in a private boarding school. But no luggage had ever arrived. No laughter had ever echoed down the halls. No medical doctor had visited. There was only the sound of a weeping 7-year-old girl, locked in the dark 30 feet above the most opulent living room in Chicago. That evening at 9:30, Victoria summoned Kendra to the kitchen and placed a covered plate containing cold rice, boiled carrots, and a half glass of tap water on the stainless steel island. "Take this upstairs," Victoria instructed, her eyes narrowing with unmistakable malice. "Unlock the door, leave the plate afloor, and lock it behind you immediately. Do not speak to her. Do not touch her." Kendra took the small brass key with a trembling palm. Her heart hammered violently against her ribs with every step she took up the private service staircase. When she turned the lock and pushed the heavy door open, the room smelled of stale air, closed heavy drapes, and cheap cleaning solvent. Sitting on a thin woolen blanket in the far corner was a little black girl, no older than 7, wearing a faded yellow sundress that hung loosely over her frail, protruding collarbones. Her dark hair was parted in rough, untidy braids, and her large brown eyes were filled with unspeakable fear. "What is your name, sweetheart?" Kendra whispered, kneeling on the floorboards and offering the glass of water. The little girl took a shivering sip, staring at Kendra's worn face. "Maya," she whispered back. "Where is my Aunt Sarah?" The lady in the green dress said I would see my aunt once the lawyers finished signing the papers in Mississippi. Before Kendra could reply, heavy footsteps resonated in the gallery corridor outside. Maya grabbed Kendra's wrist with surprising strength, her tiny fingers digging into the mended fabric of Kendra's sleeve. "Please don't leave me alone in the dark." The raw desperation in the child's eyes struck Kendra like a physical blow. For one agonizing second, she did not see a stranger. She saw her brother Devon at 7 years old, clinging to her skirt on the cold night their mother died without medicine. "I promise you I will come back," Kendra whispered fiercely, pulling the child into a swift, warm embrace. Kendra slipped out of the room just as Victoria reached the threshold. Victoria snatched the brass key from Kendra's hand, searched her face for hesitation, and warned her that one single mistake would leave her brother without a hospital bed by sunrise. Later that night, unable to sleep in her tiny basement staff quarters, Kendra sat on the edge of her narrow cot with her phone in hand. She opened the direct contact for Malik Sterling and began typing. "Mr. Sterling, there is an innocent child trapped inside your home." She hesitated. A shadow crossed beneath her doorway. A small piece of paper slid silently across the linoleum floor. Kendra waited until the footsteps faded before picking up the folded note. Written in sharp, elegant handwriting were 6 words. "Your brother needs you to stay silent." At that exact moment, Malik Sterling's private charter was descending through the low clouds above Chicago. He looked out at the distant grid of city lights, touching the velvet jewelry box in his coat pocket, completely unaware that inside his own sanctuary, an innocent child was being erased, and a desperate sister was running out of time. The grandfather clock in the central hall struck 2:14 in the morning, with 3 deep, metallic chimes that vibrated through the floorboards. Malik Sterling remained hidden in the deep shadows of the guest gallery, listening to the heavy oak deadbolt turn twice as Victoria finished her cruel inspection and descended toward the master bedroom. In the dark hallway, Kendra stood trembling, with the mended cuff of her gray uniform pulled tightly over her knuckles, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps that smelled of pure adrenaline and fear. Malik stepped out from behind the velvet drapes, his tall frame looming in the moonlight like an unyielding shadow. "Get to the staff basement," Malik whispered, his deep baritone stripped of all warmth. "Act as if you never saw me step through that front door tonight." Kendra looked up into his hardened features, tears glittering against her dark skin. "If she finds out, Miss Sterling, she will destroy my brother before the sun rises." "No one touches your family while you stand under my roof," Malik replied, his voice firm and cold as winter iron. "Go now." Kendra slipped down the narrow service stairs without another sound, her bare feet moving over the cold steps with the practiced silence of someone accustomed to being invisible. Malik walked back down the grand staircase, grabbed his leather travel bag from behind the foyer bench, and let himself out through the heavy side door into the freezing night. He walked 300 yards down the private winding driveway, climbed into the dark leather interior of his chauffeured town car, where his driver was waiting near the security gatehouse, and instructed the man to drive through the empty streets of Lake Forest until dawn broke over the lake. He needed the world to believe he had landed on the morning commuter flight from New York. He needed Victoria to believe her web of deceit was still entirely intact. At 6:30 that morning, the black Lincoln pulled into the limestone motor court with deliberate rumbling noise. Malik stepped out into the crisp morning air, dressed in a fresh navy-tailored suit, holding the small velvet jewelry box in his right hand. Inside the foyer, Victoria came sweeping down the marble stairs in a tailored silk robe of pale peach, her styled hair framing an immaculate smile that looked as radiant as it was completely hollow. She threw her slender arms around his neck, burying her face into the lapel of his overcoat with an exaggerated gasp of delight. "Malik, darling, you were supposed to be in Manhattan until Monday afternoon," Victoria purred, kissing his cheek with lips painted in sharp crimson. "Why didn't you call me from the airport so I could have the kitchen staff prepare a proper breakfast? I wanted to see your face when I walked through the door unannounced," Malik said quietly, stepping back to hand her the velvet box. 19 days in boardroom negotiations made me realize that some moments cannot wait for a calendar. Victoria opened the velvet box, her hazel eyes widening with genuine greed as she traced the $84,000 diamond and platinum cuff. She held her wrist out to the morning light, laughing softly with the effortless entitlement of a woman who had never known the indignity of counting pennies at a grocery checkout. Yet even as she wrapped her arms around him again, Malik felt the rigid, unnatural tension in her shoulders. Her eyes darted twice toward the upper landing, checking the silence of the east corridor with calculated precision. "Is everything quiet in the house?" Malik asked casually, walking toward the grand dining room where fresh porcelain coffee cups had been arranged on linen mats. "Of course, darling," Victoria replied smoothly, following closely behind him. "The staff has kept the grounds immaculate, though the housekeeper, Kendra, has been somewhat careless with her afternoon duties lately. I am considering replacing her with an agency resort for our formal engagement dinner next weekend." "Why would you replace a girl who works 70 hours a week without complaint?" Malik, lifting his cup to his lips. Victoria paused, her teaspoon hovering over the silver sugar bowl for half a second too long. "She is distracted by personal drama, darling. Her family from the South Side has endless medical debts, and frankly, I find that sort of perpetual desperation rather exhausting to manage in a home of this stature." "Desperation is rarely a choice," Victoria, Malik said, setting his cup down with a sharp porcelain click. "It is usually a circumstance forced upon people who have no shield." Victoria laughed lightly, a soft, dismissive sound that curdled the blood in his veins. "Well, let us not spoil your first morning home with the troubles of the working class. You look exhausted, Malik. Why don't you rest in the private suite while I take care of the afternoon appointments for our wedding registry on Michigan Avenue?" Malik nodded slowly, watching her walk away with the diamond cuff sparkling against her wrist. Behind that polished smile lay a monster who could lock a 7-year-old child in an unventilated storage room and threaten the life of a dying boy without a single flicker of remorse. By 3:45 that afternoon, Victoria's luxury sedan cleared the front security gates, leaving the sprawling mansion under the watchful eye of 2 private guards. Malik waited 45 minutes in his ground-floor executive study, staring out at the rain-slicked rosebushes while reviewing security logs on his laptop. The digital camera footage for the third-floor corridor from the previous 14 days had been completely wiped, replaced by a looping, static graphic file. The authorization code for the deletion belonged to the personal account Victoria used for household management. At 4:15, Malik made his way down the dim-tiled corridor leading to the basement laundry facility. The air smelled of industrial detergent, damp cotton, and the sharp, sour steam of an iron pressing against heavy table linens. In the corner of the low-ceilinged room, Kendra Hayes was standing over an industrial ironing board, her pale gray uniform sleeve rolled up to reveal thin, muscular arms marked by old steam burns and red irritation from harsh chemicals. Beside her on a wooden crate sat a battered, chipped tin lockbox with a faded brass combination dial. Kendra turned sharply at the sound of his footsteps, her eyes widening in immediate panic as she reached out to shield the tin box. Her elbow caught the edge of the crate, knocking the metal container onto the concrete floor with a loud, clattering crash. The lid popped open. The contents scattered across the damp floorboards. Kendra dropped instantly to her knees, scrambling desperately to gather the loose papers before Malik could reach them. "Please, Mr. Sterling, I am sorry," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "I will clean it up right now. I was only organizing my personal items during my 10-minute break." Malik did not answer. He crouched down beside the kneeling woman, his large, scarred hand reaching for a piece of paper that had slid against his polished leather shoe. It was a crumpled, faded carbon copy invoice from Southside Community Hospital. The total balance due at the bottom of the page was printed in red ink, $18,240.63. Attached to the invoice were 11 torn stubs from weekly payroll checks, each showing gross earnings of $409.40 for 28 hours of cleaning, with the word "urgent" handwritten across the margin in blue ballpoint pen. Beside the papers lay a small, weathered snapshot of an 18-year-old boy in a wheelchair, smiling faintly while holding a worn high school diploma and $47.80 in crumpled $1 bills. Malik froze. The tin box in front of him was identical to the dented metal candy tin his own mother had kept under her mattress 30 years ago in the projects of Altgeld Gardens. His mother, Sarah Sterling, had possessed that exact same tin box. She had kept her unpaid pharmacy bills and $22 in crumpled tips inside it, counting the change every Sunday night by the light of a single 40-watt bulb while coughing into a rag. When she collapsed on the cold floor of that South Side textile mill, the factory manager had thrown her dented tin box into the alley garbage bin, sneering that poor women should learn to die on their own time. Malik had spent 22 years building a $4 billion empire to bury that memory, yet here it was, staring him in the face from the concrete floor of his own basement. Kendra looked at him, tears welling in her exhausted brown eyes as she saw the sudden terrifying grief tightening the billionaire's jaw. "Why are you looking at my things like that, sir?" she asked, her voice cracking. Malik slowly handed the crumpled invoice back to her, his fingers brushing against the rough calluses on her palm. "My mother had the same box," Malik said, his deep voice barely above a whisper. "She worked 80 hours a week at a garment mill on 35th Street. She died because she was $3,450 short of paying for an oxygen tank and antibiotics." Kendra stared at the powerful billionaire before her, the man whose face appeared on Forbes covers and logistics terminals across the Midwest. She saw no arrogance in his dark eyes. She saw only the bleeding, unhealed scar of a boy who had watched the world crush the person he loved most. "My brother Devon is all I have left, Mr. Sterling," Kendra whispered, clutching the metal box against her chest. "When our parents passed, he promised me he would study mechanical engineering. Now his bone marrow is failing, and Miss Victoria told me that if I ever speak about the little girl upstairs, her uncle will make sure Devon is transferred to a hospice facility where the life support machines are turned off after 7 days." "Who is her uncle?" Malik demanded, his eyes narrowing into cold, lethal focus. "State Senator Arthur Vance," Kendra said, trembling as she spoke the name. "He came to the house 11 nights ago in a black limousine with tinted windows. He brought the little girl Maya, carrying a torn canvas school bag from a private shelter in Clarksdale, Mississippi. I heard him tell Miss Victoria that the child's legal guardianship was being transferred under a shell charity so she could be sent to an estate in Europe before the state auditors examined the Southern shelter's books." Malik stood up slowly, his towering frame casting a long, unyielding shadow across the concrete basement walls. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with sickening precision. Victoria's aristocratic family had built their political dynasty on high society philanthropy, using charitable shelters in impoverished rural communities to traffic vulnerable children into undocumented domestic service for wealthy foreign donors. "Listen to me very carefully, Kendra," Malik said, placing a firm, reassuring hand on her trembling shoulder. "You will not clean another floor in fear, and your brother will not spend another night at the mercy of the Vance family." "What are you going to do, Mr. Sterling?" Kendra asked, looking up at him with desperate hope. Malik reached into his coat, pulled out his encrypted smartphone, and dialed the private line of Marcus Cole. "Marcus," Malik spoke into the receiver, his voice dropping into the deadly calm of a general preparing for war. "I need our private aviation hangar at Midway secured, and I need our chief legal counsel at my downtown office in 45 minutes. We are opening an audit on every charitable foundation carrying the Vance family name, and we are starting with the Senate Finance Committee in Mississippi." He ended the call, looking down at Kendra as she held her dented tin box against her apron. The silence in the mansion was broken. The hunt had begun. The industrial humidifiers hummed quietly in the concrete basement, vibrating against the iron pipes overhead as cold water dripped slowly into a galvanized steel utility sink. Malik reached inside his breast pocket, drew out a slim leather checkbook, and uncapped a heavy gold fountain pen with deliberate, measured movements. He wrote out the date, etched Kendra's full legal name across the center line, and filled in the numeric box with a crisp figure, $100,000.00. He tore the check from the binding with a sharp, dry rip, extending the paper toward the young housekeeper standing beside the ironing board. "Take this to the private banking desk at Northern Trust on Wacker Drive. First thing tomorrow morning," Malik said, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man accustomed to erasing human suffering with the stroke of a pen. "Pack your belongings tonight, arrange a private medical transport for your brother Devon to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, and never step foot back into Cook County again." Kendra looked down at the pale blue paper hovering between them, the ink still wet under the harsh fluorescent light. She looked at the signature, then at the staggering number of zeros that could wipe away every debt, every sleepless night, and every tear she had shed over the past 4 years. Her hand remained at her side, her fingers curled tightly around the dented metal tin box. "I cannot take this, Mr. Sterling," Kendra said softly, her voice steady and clear despite the exhaustion etched into her dark face. Malik's brow furrowed, a rare flicker of irritation cutting through his usually impenetrable composure. This is not a loan, Kendra. It is a gift that guarantees your brother receives the best hematologist in the country without another hour of delay. You earn $14.60 an hour in this house. You have $47 in your savings tin. Take the check and secure your family's safety. Kendra took a single step backward, lifting her chin until her eyes met his with an unyielding, unbreakable dignity that caused the billionaire to lower his arm. With all due respect, Mr. Sterling, my brother and I may be poor, but our lives are not for sale, Kendra said, her words striking the damp air like cold stones. If I take your $100,000 and run away to Minnesota while 7-year-old Maya remains locked in that dark room upstairs, I am no better than Miss Victoria and her uncle. They use money to buy silence. You are trying to use money to buy yourself a clean conscience. Malik stood completely motionless, the check feeling suddenly heavy and foreign in his hand. No one had spoken to him with such raw, unfiltered honesty since the day his mother had scolded him on the front stoop of their Altgeld Gardens apartment 25 years ago. In the corporate towers of Chicago and New York, men bowed to his wealth. In boardrooms, people traded their ethics for a fraction of the figure written on that blue slip. Yet this young woman, wearing a torn uniform and mended canvas shoes, stood in a basement laundry room and rejected a fortune because a stranger's child was weeping in the dark. His wealth could buy logistics fleets, private planes, and political access. It could not buy moral courage. He believed he was acting as a savior. But Kendra's refusal exposed the bitter truth. He was simply trying to manage a crisis without confronting the rot inside his own home. Forgive me, Malik said quietly, his deep voice carrying a humility he had not felt in 2 decades. You are right. Malik slowly folded the check in half, tore it into 4 pieces, and let the scraps fall into the waste bin beside the sink. We do not run, Kendra, Malik continued, stepping closer and looking her directly in the eye as an equal. We will not bribe our way out of this darkness. We will dismantle it from the inside out, brick by brick. What is the plan, sir? Kendra asked, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly as she recognized the shift in his spirit. At 6:30 that evening, Malik initiated the first phase of the operation from his private study on the ground floor. He did not use his personal bank account or corporate credit lines, which were monitored by household staff and financial accountants connected to the Vance family. Instead, he contacted the Sterling Opportunity Foundation, an independent arm's-length medical trust he had established 10 years earlier in honor of his mother. Within 45 minutes, Devin Hayes was officially enrolled in an endowed, fully funded clinical trial for aplastic anemia at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, complete with round-the-clock private security stationed outside his room, under the direct command of retired Chicago police detectives. By 8:15 p.m., Kendra received a secure text message from her brother's personal nurse, confirming that Devin had been safely transferred to a private 5th-floor suite, his medications fully secured for the next 12 months. With Devin shielded from retaliation, Malik and Kendra turned their focus to the captive child on the 3rd floor. While Victoria was downstairs hosting an impromptu dinner for 3 members of the Lake Forest Historical Society, Kendra used a hidden service key to slip into the locked attic suite with a bowl of warm vegetable soup and a clean cotton towel. Malik waited in the shadowed hallway, keeping watch as Kendra sat on the floor beside the frightened little girl. Maya looked up with wide, tear-filled eyes, clutching a faded blue wool blanket around her frail shoulders. "Did Aunt Sarah send you?" the child whispered, her small voice trembling in the dark. "Your Aunt Sarah loves you very much, Maya," Kendra whispered back gently, wiping a smudge of dust from the child's cheek with the damp cloth. "We are working to bring you home, but I need you to help us understand how you arrived here. Do you remember the place with a big iron sign where the gentleman picked you up?" Maya nodded slowly, taking a hesitant sip of the warm broth. "It was called the Hope Harbor Children's Haven in Clarksdale. The man with the shiny silver hair told the director that I was going to Chicago to live in a mansion with a piano and attend a private academy. But when we got here, the lady in the green dress took my shoes and told me that if I made any noise, the police would arrest my aunt for taking charity money. Did the man have a briefcase with papers inside?" Malik asked softly from the open doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the dim hall light. Maya reached beneath the corner of the worn sofa cushions and pulled out a crumpled yellowed luggage tag that had been torn from her canvas bag. It was stamped with the official seal of the Illinois State Senate and bore the printed name, Office of Senator Arthur Vance, Special Humanitarian Initiative. Malik photographed the luggage tag with his encrypted phone, instantly transmitting the high-resolution image to his senior counsel, Marcus Cole, and federal child welfare investigators in Springfield. The legal net was beginning to tighten, linking the state senator directly to the unauthorized cross-state transport of an undocumented minor. At 11:45 p.m., Victoria concluded her dinner party and escorted her guests to their luxury vehicles in the limestone motor court. Malik stood by the second-floor window, watching her laugh and wave with practiced aristocratic charm. Her uncle, Senator Arthur Vance, was scheduled to appear on Sunday morning for a high-profile press conference to celebrate the upcoming Sterling Vance wedding and announce a $30 million urban redevelopment initiative backed by Sterling Meridian Logistics. Malik planned to use that very press conference to deliver the evidence directly into the hands of waiting federal prosecutors. Suddenly, the heavy wrought iron security gates at the end of the long driveway swung open without an access signal from the main house. Two unmarked black Chevrolet Suburbans with dark-tinted windows entered the property, their high beams sweeping across the manicured lawns as they accelerated rapidly toward the service entrance. Malik checked his watch. It was exactly 12:14 in the morning. Kendra rushed out from the service staircase, her face pale as ash. "Mr. Sterling, that is the senator's private security detail. They were not supposed to return until Sunday morning." Malik moved to the landing, his jaw tightening into rigid granite as he heard the heavy thump of car doors slamming shut in the rear courtyard. Four broad-shouldered men in dark tactical jackets stepped out, carrying heavy composite travel cases and a set of master electronic keycards. Behind them walked Senator Arthur Vance himself, his silver hair gleaming under the security floodlights, his trench coat billowing in the freezing wind. The timeline had shattered. The predators had come to purge the evidence 48 hours ahead of schedule. The final battle for an innocent child's life was starting right now. The cold midnight rain lashed against the French windows of the East Gallery, rattling the heavy frames with sudden, violent gusts. Down in the marble foyer, the heavy oak doors banged open as Senator Arthur Vance stepped inside, shaking raindrops from the cashmere collar of his dark, tailored overcoat. Beside him stood Victoria, her face flushed with frantic urgency, gesturing wildly toward the third-floor service corridor. Two of the senator's private operatives, broad-shouldered men wearing unmarked rain jackets, carried a heavy canvas duffel bag and an electronic signal jammer toward the private stairs. "Get the child into the rear transport immediately," Senator Vance commanded in a low, gravelly rasp that cut through the cavernous foyer. "The federal audit team in Springfield has flagged the Clarksdale transport manifests, and we cannot afford to have a single living witness inside Cook County when the morning sun breaks." Victoria nodded sharply, her eyes darting toward the basement entrance. "What about the maid? She has seen the girl's face, and she knows the senator's foundation was behind the transport." "Handle the girl through the local precinct," the senator said dismissively, stepping toward the library fireplace. "Plant the heirloom diamond necklace and ein locker, call the Lake Forest police desk, and ensure she spends the next 72 hours in holding without bail on felony grand larceny charges. By the time any public defender looks at her file, the child will be 300 miles south of the Canadian border." Kendra stood at the landing of the service stairs, her fingers digging deep into the wooden balustrade as the full weight of their conspiracy washed over her. She knew that running out the side entrance would save her from the fabricated police report. She knew that staying inside this house meant facing prison, humiliation, and the destruction of her family name. Yet, as she heard the muffled cry of 7-year-old Maya being dragged from the third-floor room in the dark, every instinct of self-preservation inside her chest evaporated. She did not run to the basement. She ran toward the child. Kendra sprinted up the narrow wooden steps, bursting into the third-floor hallway just as one of the operatives reached into the dark storage room. The man had wrapped Maya in a heavy black woolen blanket, lifting the terrified, kicking child into his arms with cold, mechanical detachment. Maya's tiny hands clawed at the air as she let out a piercing, desperate scream. "Put her down," Kendra yelled, throwing her entire body across the threshold to block the narrow doorway. "You will not drag this baby out of here like a piece of stolen cargo." The operative sneered, shoving Kendra violently against the wall with his free elbow. "Out of the way, girl, before you end up in a ditch off the interstate." Kendra rebounded instantly, grabbing the man's heavy jacket with both hands her fingernails tearing through the nylon fabric as she pulled him backward with all the strength in her working-class frame. Maya slipped from his grasp, tumbling onto the soft corridor carpet and scrambling behind Kendra's legs. Victoria arrived at the top of the landing seconds later, her face contorted with aristocratic rage as she held up a velvet jewel box containing the Vance family's emerald and diamond pendant. "Step away from that door, Kendra," Victoria shrieked, waving the pendant in the air. "I have already dialed the chief of police. The moment they arrive and find this $500,000 necklace inside your canvas uniform bag, you will be facing 15 years in state prison." "You can put whatever you want in my bag, Victoria," Kendra said, her voice dropping into a razor-sharp, unbreakable calm as she stood firmly between the operatives and the shivering child. "You can call every corrupt politician in this state. But you will have to kill me on this floor before I let you sell another black child into the dark." Victoria signaled to the second operative, who lunged forward with a pair of steel flex cuffs. "That is enough," a voice rumbled from the shadows at the end of the long gallery. Malik Sterling stepped into the glare of the overhead chandelier, dressed in an immaculate black suit, his dark eyes burning with lethal sovereign fury. Behind him walked two uniformed officers from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Human Trafficking Task Force, and Marcus Cole, who held a glowing tablet displaying the real-time transmission of the House's internal security feed. Malik, Darley gasped, her voice instantly shifting into sweet trembling panic as she lowered the necklace. "Thank God you woke up. This housekeeper has completely lost her mind. She broke into the private suite, attempted to kidnap this poor girl, and stole my grandmother's diamond pendant from the master bedroom safe." Malik did not look at the necklace. He did not look at Victoria's trembling hands. He walked directly past the two frozen operatives, stopped in front of Kendra, and gently placed his warm wool overcoat around her shivering shoulders. "You do not have to fight alone anymore, Kendra," Malik said softly, his deep baritone filled with profound respect. He then turned toward Victoria and the senator, his expression hardening into cold, impenetrable iron. "Your little theater is over, Victoria," Malik said, his voice echoing through the three-story estate with the force of a sledgehammer. "The digital camera backup in this house was never deleted. It was rerouted directly to an off-site server managed by Federal Cyber Forensics 3 hours after I landed in Chicago." Marcus Cole held the tablet forward, pressing play on a high-definition video file. On the screen, clear and undeniable, was footage from 48 hours earlier. Victoria Vance sliding the diamond pendant into Kendra's locker, followed by Senator Arthur Vance arriving in his state vehicle, handing a folder of fraudulent guardianship papers to an associate, and ordering the child locked in the unventilated third-floor room. Senator Vance stepped up the stairs, his silver hair bristling as his face turned a deep, furious crimson. "Malik, you are stepping into waters you do not comprehend. The Vance family built the political infrastructure that allows your logistics fleet to operate across 5 state lines. If you pursue this absurd crusade for a maid and a nameless foster child, I will have your state operating licenses revoked before the markets open on LaSalle Street." Malik took 2 slow, towering steps toward the politician, looking down at the older man with absolute contempt. "You think your political licenses gave me my strength, Arthur?" Malik's voice dropped to a deadly, quiet rasp. "My mother died on a cold concrete floor because people like you believe the poor exist only to be used, discarded, and buried in unmarked graves. I spent 22 years building a $4 billion fortress so that men like you could never crush another innocent family under my watch." The 2 federal agents moved up the stairs, displaying their golden badges and federal warrants. "Senator Arthur Vance, you are under arrest for federal child trafficking, interstate coercion, and obstruction of justice." "Victoria Vance, you are being detained as a primary co-conspirator." Victoria began to sob uncontrollably, dropping the diamond necklace onto the floorboards as the cold steel handcuffs clicked around her manicured wrists. She looked at Malik, pleading for mercy, but the billionaire turned his back, stepping aside so the agents could lead the conspirators down the grand staircase into the flashing red and blue lights waiting in the rainy motor court. In the quiet hallway, Kendra sank onto the carpet, wrapping both arms around Maya as the little girl buried her face into Kendra's apron, her tiny shoulders shaking with long overdue tears of relief. Malik knelt down beside them on the polished oak floorboards, the ghost of his mother's memory no longer burning with bitter regret, but standing as an eternal beacon of light. "You kept your promise to her, Kendra," Malik said softly, his voice trembling with rare emotion. Kendra looked up, meeting the eyes of the billionaire who had finally found the true measure of his power. "We both did, Mr. Sterling," Kendra whispered. The sirens faded into the distance, the storm had cleared. The final chapter of redemption had arrived. 8 months after the flashing sirens faded from the limestone motor court of the Lake Forest estate, the warm morning sun rose over the south side of Chicago, casting long golden beams across the brick facades of Bronzeville. The heavy wrought iron gates of the Sterling residence stood wide open, welcoming the cool breeze blowing off Lake Michigan. The cavernous mansion, which had once felt like an echoing mausoleum of cold ambition and dark secrets, was now filled with the lively chatter of social workers, community organizers, and laughing children gathered beneath white linen canopies on the lawn. Maya was no longer the silent, trembling girl in the oversized yellow sundress. Dressed in a bright blue pleated jumper, her dark hair neatly woven into beaded braids, she ran across the manicured grass, holding tightly to the hand of her Aunt Sarah, who had arrived from Mississippi 3 weeks earlier under the full legal and medical protection of the state. The fraudulent guardianship files had been permanently dismantled by federal prosecutors, leading to the indictment of 22 individuals connected to Senator Arthur Vance's network across 3 southern states. Maya was enrolled in a primary school 2 blocks from her family home, her laughter clear and free. She had not come back to remember the dark storage room. She had come to celebrate freedom. In the center of the garden, Devin Hayes sat in an upright armchair near the terrace, looking healthy and vibrant. His aplastic anemia was in full, sustained remission, following a successful bone marrow transplant and specialized antibody regimen at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. In his lap rested a heavy blue binder filled with mechanical engineering blueprints and an official acceptance letter from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Beside him stood Kendra, dressed in an elegant knee blazer and tailored slacks, her dark face radiating a profound, unshakable peace that no paycheck could ever bestow. She had not taken a single dollar of unearned charity. When Malik had offered her a luxury penthouse and an unconditional multi-million-dollar trust fund following the trial, Kendra had looked him in the eye and gently declined the gift. "I did not stand up for Maya so I could be handed a life of leisure, Mr. Sterling," Kendra had told him with unwavering pride. "Give me an education, give me the tools to stand on my own feet, and let me earn every step of my future." Malik had honored her wish with immense respect. He funded a comprehensive 4-year academic scholarship for Kendra at Loyola University, where she was currently completing her degree in social enterprise and community advocacy. More importantly, he did not treat her as a subordinate or a rescued employee. He appointed her as the independent executive director of the newly chartered Sarah Sterling Family Empowerment Trust, an autonomous nonprofit organization dedicated to legal defense, medical emergency funds, and fair housing support for working-class single mothers across the Midwest. Malik stood 20 paces away beneath the shade of an old oak tree, watching Kendra adjust Devin's collar with the same fierce, protective tenderness she had shown in the darkest hour of the storm. He wore an unbuttoned dark linen shirt, holding a small chipped metal candy tin with a faded brass combination lock in his left hand. Earlier that morning at 6:15, Malik had driven alone to the Oakwood Cemetery on the south side of Chicago. He had walked 30 yards through the dewy grass to a simple granite headstone bearing his mother's name, Sarah Sterling, a heart that never yielded. For 22 long years, he had visited that grave with a soul crushed by bitter guilt, constantly hearing the echoes of his 20-year-old self weeping over $3,400 in unpaid medical debts. He had built a $4 billion empire trying to outrun that grief, believing that power alone could rewrite his past helplessness. Standing before the stone, Malik had placed a bouquet of fresh white lilies beside the marker and opened the dented tin box. Inside lay his mother's old $47, accompanied by Maya's blue thread friendship bracelet and a clean copy of the new community center charter. "I could not save you, Mama," Malik had whispered, tears falling freely onto the granite. "But your pain was not in vain. We are keeping the doors open for everyone who comes behind us." In that quiet cemetery, the heavy iron chains around his chest had finally dissolved into the morning air. He had spent his adult life believing wealth was a shield against the world's cruelty. He now understood that wealth was merely a tool, completely meaningless, unless anchored by the courage to stand for those who had no voice. Kendra walked across the lawn and stopped beside him, watching Maya hand a paper flower to one of the visiting nurses. "Are you all right, Mr. Sterling?" Kendra asked softly. Malik looked at the young woman who had stood between a child and an empire of corruption, smiling with genuine quiet warmth. "I am better than I have ever been, Kendra," Malik replied. "And please, call me Malik. We are partners in this work." Kendra looked back at the sprawling estate, where she had once walked barefoot in fear. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had returned to this house on Monday instead of Thursday?" Malik took a deep breath of the fresh lake air, his voice steady and resolute. "Some injustices survive not because people are blind to evil, but because fear convinces good men and women to remain silent in the shadows," Malik said. "It tells the poor that their dignity has a price, and it convinces the powerful that their reputation is worth more than human lives. You broke that cycle the moment you refused to look away." Kendra touched the lapel of her blazer, looking out at her brother and the families gathering around the luncheon tables. "A home is not defined by marble floors or high gates," Kendra said softly. "It is built by the courage to protect the people inside it." The afternoon sun climbed high over Lake Forest, filling every room of the open estate with golden light and the clear, ringing sound of children's laughter. The shadow of the locked door was gone forever. A new foundation of honor had taken its place. Wealth may build towering skyscrapers on LaSalle Street, but only unbreakable dignity and the pursuit of truth can truly redeem a human soul.